Hello. I'm not hearing anything. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Mark is muted.
Mark, you are muted.
Yeah, no one can hear anything he's saying.
Okay. All right. Until you figure that out, I guess we should mention the Matt Gaetz report is said to be imminent, unless he successfully sues to prevent it from being released. They're saying it's coming out pretty soon.
What is his report about?
That he bought a bunch of hookers and did some drugs and bragged about it and showed pictures on the floor of the house of all the babes that he was banging, and that's what's rumored. I don't know. We'll have to wait for the report to see what comes out. But in more, I'd say, relevant news, because he's out of the house. He's I think doing a talk show or a podcast or some crap.
He's doing a talk show. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now we can hear you.
Yeah. We should talk about Fetterman for a second. Now, Fetterman's a Democratic senator and a lot of Democrats are pissed at Fetterman because Fetterman says if you're cheering for Trump to fail, you're cheering against America. And I tend to want to give Fetterman the benefit of the doubt that he seems like a guy who says what he thinks. He doesn't always toe the Democratic line. And, I don't think he's gone fully MAGA. And I just think he says whatever the hell he wants. He dresses the way he wants. And so we'll see
a lot of things like that.
We need more people like that. People need to be independent. Rick, this whole thing of these parties is absolutely ridiculous, and when you go to law school, you're taught to be independent and think independently, but apparently in politics, you're thought to suck up to whichever party you belong to, and you're seeing right now a trend in the United States where people are moving away from the parties that really suck this country dry. And when I say parties, it's both of them. So that's one reason I think 40% of people now identify as independent, because they know they're getting garbage from both sides of the aisle.
Well, I'm in favor of a certain amount of sucking up when it comes to elections. Like, just because you only agree with like 80% of the party's platform, you vote for some, third-party lunatic and cost your party the election. I'm not in favor of that, but I'm also not in favor of going along with every dang thing that party leadership says.
Yeah, especially I didn't say you should vote for either party. I mean, you should vote for Democrat or Republican, but you got to let each person stand on their own 2 feet and not look at the party suck-ups, which. Right. Which has been our tradition for like the last 100 years. So, it's hard to break tradition, but look, our educational system doesn't teach people to think independently. They teach them to suck up parties. So,
hey, Nick,
that's what we have. That's what we got. It's not going to, I don't know if it's going to change anytime soon.
Well, I don't know if it's going to change, but speaking of that and everything, I was just wondering, and apparently the whole news was missed, but I'll get to that later, or maybe I'll do a report and do a paste of what I was saying and everything. But one of the things I didn't get to, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is we had those drones in New Jersey and everything. Now apparently they are drones that are falling from the sky doing Orlando holiday light show. So apparently they're not just in New Jersey, they're in Orlando too. So they said that they left a young man hospitalized there in Orlando.
But these are official drones that do like patterns in the air, right? This isn't like some mysterious thing.
Yeah, and the thing is, what they have to do is they have to monitor these crazy drones, because some people get out of control on what they do. I bought some for my kids. They just go straight up in the air, and they're frankly for the most part unregulated. So it's as they get bigger, badder, and kids grow up and they use bigger, badder drones, it can create some problems, from air traffic control to dangerous conditions, et cetera. So. And I don't think they come with instructions. In other words, people just wildcat these drones around.
Well, apparently this boy in Florida is going to undergo open heart surgery after he was hit by the drone. So the drone apparently hit him, and I guess it hit him there.
I mean, depending on how big the drone is, obviously.
They're talking about now. The LA Olympics are in 4 years, and they're talking about drone air taxis between the venues, which seems like a ticket for minor disaster.
It could be.
I mean, they might work. I mean, it's just like helicopter rides.
But speaking of minor disasters, apparently Trump wants 2 major countries. He says that he is demanding control of Greenland, and apparently Greenland has rejected that. And he's also said that he wants control again of Panama, because Donald Trump and Panama trade, and apparently there's a whole conversation about taking back over the Panama Canal. So I know these are relatively small.
Has he offered any justification? Now, we went in and we built the Panama Canal for, Teddy Roosevelt, I think, was part of it. And it took like many decades to because you're digging through, you're digging 50 miles through a country. And it took a great effort, and the U.S. I assume spent a ton of money, but we owned it for 80 years, and then we gave it back to Panama.
Yeah, and it's one of the few countries that seem to be stable in the Central America. So I don't know what the plan is in terms of that, but who knows? I mean, he comes up with some very, I would say, interesting ideas. Take back the Panama Canal.
Including
Here's
McKinley.
the latest one, Mark. I don't know if you know that. He wants to change Mount Delaney
Mount McKinley
to Mount McKinley. Okay.
Well, it's now Denali.
Denali to go back to Mount McKinley. So the thing is, I have some different thoughts on that. In other words, I'm going, okay, but he can't do it by himself. He has to have cooperation by Congress, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the ideas he throws out are you've got to you have to get support from Congress to get it through. So you can throw out all these ideas, but will they really change the name back to Mount McKinley? I don't know.
And why? Oh, so I looked it up. Panama Canal cost $15 billion to build in today's dollars between 1903 and 1914.
Yeah, but didn't we have a lease agreement with them that expired?
I'll look it up.
I think we did, if I remember correctly, and everything.
I think that's the reason Panama got back the Panama Canal, is that our lease expired. And in other words, you have a 100-year lease, 100 years are over, and boom. And Panama.
So we controlled it from 1904 to 1999.
Right.
And
so, well, I mean, we'll see. There's one thing Mike makes right, and we shouldn't have left Afghanistan. We should have just annexed it, And Mike makes right. We should take Panama. And
speaking of Mike making right, apparently, speaking of Trump, he has made it very clear that he's the president. Mr. Musk is not a co-president, and all along those lines. So he said that Musk is not really in charge, and he's even saying he's not going to be president. And part of that is because he is of South African descent and everything. But he's bristling at this notion that he's ceding some of his power over to Mr. Musk. What is our thoughts on this?
No, he's not. I mean, frankly, Musk has no power except Trump's ear. Other than Trump's ear, Musk, he has no official position. Looks like he will not be given an official position, or if so, it'll be tangential, and he'll have zero power. So his only power is Twitter, which is now X, in other words, the microphone, and also Trump's ear, yelling in Trump's ear. But Donald's going to have to make all the decisions. So, all he's going to do is gets Trump's ear. So, we'll see what he comes up with.
I think Musk is now worth, well, when you talk about somebody's net worth based on stock valuations, it's a little, but based on stock, he's worth $450 billion right now.
Some magic number. But remember, his stock is trading at a very high multiple. So, I mean, can you imagine if when I looked at Tesla one time, I was going, it's like 1,000 times earnings. So if you made like $1,000, you're worth 100,000. Okay, that's just totally unrealistic, And so what happens is that his net worth is based on earnings. Can you imagine if you made like 7,000 a year in income, you're worth 700,000? Is that true? No, it isn't. And that's the Tesla stock. It's way overvalued, which is one reason Bill Gates shorted it. The only question is, will the market eventually recognize the reality of the Tesla stock at 1,000 times earnings? I don't know. I can't trade in that stock at 1,000 times earnings because it's like way overvalued. Every time I look at that, if those things were real and I got 1,000 times earnings, I'd be worth like 70 or 80 million. I mean, it's ridiculous. So his net worth is basically fake.
Hey,
So I mean, and then some people love Teslas. Some people have reservations about Teslas.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a meme stock. It's like AMC. You know, it can go up, it can go way down, it could crash tomorrow. I mean, who knows where
but
Tesla stock
is it just Tesla or is it the EV market? Because I think I mentioned and I thought it was Rivet, but it's not a Rivet. But a friend of mine actually owns a EV, but it's an EV Mustang. So it's a Mustang.
It's a competitive market, and of course he needs Trump here because China is his potential major competitor.
So it's fine to have an EV if you live in like San Francisco or Los Angeles because we have a ton of charging stations. I think if
my friends
Minnesota, I don't know.
They live here in North Carolina and they got charging stations, but they're few and far between. But he and his wife both own EVs, and I know his EV because I asked him last week is a Mustang. I think his wife's is a probably a Mustang as well. It's not a Rivet or a Tesla. It's definitely one of the American brands and everything.
So here's my gripe with Teslas. Well, one, the people driving, there's usually a make of vehicle in LA that if you see them on the street, you stay away from them because it's probably driven by an idiot. And right now that's the Tesla truck. It used to be the Hummer. For a while it was Audis. But my personal gripe is I touched a Tesla with my car door, just like the teeniest little contact. The paint, the clear coat is terrible. And this is a problem with all cars, but particularly with Tesla, because they used to make auto paint out of lead, which is toxic, but very strong. And you used to be able to beat on cars. Cars used to have bumpers. You know, it used to be, when I was a kid, I learned to park by feel, parallel park. Drive till you hit the car in front of you, then back up till you hit the car. No more. You can't touch a car, especially a Tesla, because California Teslas are made in California, and they have to use water-based paint for environmental standards. And that paint just doesn't hold up to anything, and you can't even take it through a car wash without the paint getting damaged. And they recommend you buy your Tesla, you drive it off the lot, you drive it over to a place where they wrap it in plastic to protect your paint.
Okay, and that may not be a bad idea, but right now I'm without a car. When I had one, I had the Toyota Avalon, which was best by Consumer Reports in its class and best overall. And it was a really good car because one thing, it didn't end up in the shop. And it was a hybrid, and hybrids got like 30, 40 miles a gallon. So it actually was a pretty good car.
Honda and Toyota are asking to merge into one.
I'm not Honda and Nissan.
Honda and Nissan. I'm sorry, Honda and Nissan.
Yeah, Honda and Nissan. Yeah, I saw that, which would create obviously a big car company. And I mean, right now, why not? Tesla has a bigger market value than them and GM combined, which is again the magic of Tesla being out of control. So the real question is not if, it's when is Tesla going to crash? And speaking of crash and crashing the party, there's none other than the biggest crash party in the world who's about to arrive. That's Jacoby McDuffie.
I think he's in Canada. I had a question for you since you're a lawyer, and we'll see if he's in Canada. He's going to crash and tell us about what's going on in Canada since he's coming, I think, from that part of the world this time and everything. But I do have a question for you. I was watching 60 Minutes yesterday, and they did a piece on we talked about fentanyl and the migrants and everything, but apparently Mexico is concerned about the opposite direction because apparently a lot of guns that are coming to the cartel are coming from American manufacturers like Smith & Wesson. I think is being sued by Mexican government, as is some of the car dealerships, including one called Ammo AC, I think was the name that I saw, and along those lines. But as a lawyer, Nick, how much say and how much leeway or ability to sue and win will the government of Mexico have as they're going after the gun manufacturers? They're literally suing Smith & Wesson.
Well, that's a case of first impression, Mark. So that'll be up to the specialist in the courts, and I'm not familiar with that particular case. In other words, do they have a chance? Well, if you see, you always have a chance to win, and you always, even if it's like sometimes I see the suits, I give them like less than a 1%, but they always have a chance. If you call it 1%
I didn't see the 60 Minutes report, but I saw some of the tweets about it, including that there's only one gun store in all of Mexico. And that gun store is on a military base.
Exactly.
And if you want to buy a gun in Mexico, you have to show up there with papers showing that you've had psychological tests, background checks, and they're very strict. And so obviously all the guns in Mexico are not from this one gun store. Yeah, they're coming over the border.
Yeah, and you know what they did in Spain? They just eliminated it altogether. So the thing is, they did like Australia did. And here's the reality, because everybody jumps up, well, Switzerland, they have a gun law and they all have guns, but it's a different country, smaller country. It's an aberration, and they all served in the military. So they have low gun crime, but they have a lot of guns. But the rest of the European Union, they got rid of them. And frankly, it got rid of a lot of the gun crime. Same with Australia. So the U.S. is the only one that, well, it's one of the few, but probably the only developed country that has ridiculous Second Amendment gun laws, and the whole place is out of control. And it will not change.
There's a lot of stuff you can argue about. You can argue about whether, regular folks should be able to have, the AR-15 type rifles because they're fun, or some people have them to shoot at feral hogs on their ranch. But the deal is, there's a thing that every gun should come with, which is a biometric lock. It's a well-established technology, a gun or a gun container that just your fingerprint opens it for you. And whoever in your family, you want to have access to the gun, you've got to give biometric access, but no, it won't shoot, or you can't get at it for anybody else. It's easy, cheap technology. It costs like $100. And, a gun doesn't cost, even the cheapest gun costs a couple $100, so it doesn't add that much.
Well, I mean, the realities of Spain is like when I'm in an airport, I feel relatively safe because they took all the guns away from everybody in airports in the United States and around the world. I'm in Spain, relatively safe. They took away guns from everybody except for the police. Same with Australia. United States, it's not safe. It's just like Ralph Nader wrote a book. Not safe
at any speed, about the Corvair car.
Exactly, about cars. But you could write a book also, America, not safe in any place. And you're not. So, the thing is, it is what it is in the United States, and I'm happy to be in Barcelona. So what can I tell you?
Well, the argument that they made was that the majority of because we keep talking about the cartel, but the majority of the cartel weapons are not coming from that gun shop that Rick was talking about, because that is one that is heavily regulated and everything, but it's actually coming from U.S. manufacturers as well as U.S. people that are doing illicit trade, because actually they talked to people from the Mexico government as well as our government, and they actually said that a lot of the stuff that is coming is actually coming through those sources, and some of it might even be our military sources, because a lot of high-grade weapons.
The Gates report is officially out. It's 37 pages long. He did drugs, including in his office, illicit drugs, including in his congressional office. He paid women for sex, including a 17-year-old. But I don't think any of this is prosecutable, because he's a private. It violates the House rules, but he's not a member of the House anymore. And I think prosecutors have looked at what he did and decided that they couldn't get a guilty easily. Prosecutors want a 90% chance.
Yeah, you have to have beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah. So a report is totally different than prosecuting somebody in a court of law, because there's discovery rules. You have cross examinations. These are allegations. So as they say in chess, it's not that easy. But it sounds to me, though, there's a lot of smoke And where there's smoke, there's probably fire. So I
Speaking
believe
of,
Mr.
speaking of
Gates
smoke,
has
and we don't have Shaquille here to talk about it this time, but apparently Australia, which is where he spends a lot of his time, has approved extradition of a former U.S. Marine over alleged training of Chinese military. So apparently they're going to extradite him from Australia to the United States. And apparently he's a former Marine pilot who worked in China, but now he's going to be extradited to the U.S. And his name is Daniel Dugan. So it looks like that he trains some Chinese pilots and they're in Australia. So this is another major story that's coming out in the legal field. So what are you hearing about this, Rick, or are you hearing anything about this particular case?
It's 7 a.m. I'm barely awake. I'm struggling to not have my morning coffee make me have to run away to poop.
Understood. How's Canada, Jacoby?
Cold.
Cold?
Yeah, it's snowing outside. But yeah, it's cold.
Cold.
Actually, I did have a question.
You got to get closer to your mic, I think.
Oh yeah, probably so. I did have a question.
Yes.
The individual in Germany who drove the car into the crowded area, why is he not considered a terrorist?
Without knowing anything about him, I considered him a terrorist, but I noticed new stuff is coming out about him, including there were warnings against him, red flags previous to what he did.
Well, the reason I asked that because at first, because they found him to be Saudi born, they were going to go down that route. But then once they found out that he was a fan of the AfD, which is the group that's tied to neo-Nazis, that big group in Germany, as well as a group that Elon Musk is backing. Again, Elon Musk backing neo-Nazis. Interesting. But he's also anti-Muslim. So he's also a fan of Elon Musk and Alex Jones. So again, before when they said he was just Saudi born, they were going to go down the route of calling him a terrorist or a domestic terrorist. But now, because he's anti-Muslim, why is he not?
Well, he's still a freaking terrorist, and he's probably crazy, but you can be a crazy and a terrorist. It probably helps.
But along those same lines, and I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with some of our right-wing friends that watch this show and that sometimes pop on this show and everything. But that other piece that I saw on 60 Minutes, because I did watch 60 Minutes last night and everything, was the Mossad pager terrorist and everything. So if you explode a bunch of pagers, wouldn't that be a terrorist act? So that seems to me like that would be a terrorist act, even though it was their Secret Service and they acknowledged that they did it, and they said that no civilians were hurt because they were specifically targeted toward the members.
Yeah, but civilians were hurt. Like kids were hurt in that. I mean, they hurt a bunch of Hezbollah, but they also hurt the they exploded a bunch of pagers, and probably 5% weren't in the hands of the intended targets. Right? I don't know what the statistics are.
Well, the Mossad agent who was, speaking masked and everything was trying to say that it was all intended targets and that nobody was hit that was not intended. I find that hard to believe, but like I said, I'm not a member of Mossad, but who knows? What is your take on that, Jacoby? Because I don't know if you watched that 60 Minutes report.
No, I didn't get a chance to answer 60 Minutes. I mean, it's recorded.
You got to get close to the mic.
Far away from the mic.
Oh yeah, I hadn't had a chance to because being out of town. But yeah, it's recorded, so I'll probably watch it later.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Rick. Well, the other thing that I watched yesterday is not so much a news story, but it's right up your alley. I thought that this was one of the better Kennedy Center honors. I did not see the part about the Grateful Dead because unfortunately Sandman came and got me before that part. But the part about Bonnie Raitt, the part about the Apollo, the part about Arterio Sandoval, and several others was truly amazing. So I was wondering if you watched the Kennedy Center honors on yesterday or
No. In fact, I have a grudge against them because when I worked on Kimmel, I think they used to be in the same awards category as we were, and so it's like, get out of here, competitors. but usually, I think they honor 5 people every year, and you usually know 2 or 3 of them. And then this time, I recognize 4 out of the 5. You got the Apollo Theater, Bonnie Raitt, Grateful Dead, Francis Coppola, and then you got Arturo Sandoval, and I'm going to have to look up who he is. He's a jazz trumpeter and pianist. Maybe I should know him, but 4 out of 5 that I know off the top of my head is pretty good.
Yeah, and this was apparently the first time ever that an institution was honored, because like you said, it's usually individuals, but the Apollo as an institution was who was honored, and not just the founders of the Apollo. It was actually the institution that was there that was honored.
But yeah, it's I mean, frickin' everybody knows the Apollo,
Right.
And you know it's gone through a bunch of cultural changes in America. You know, you've got the Harlem Renaissance 100 years ago, and then you got New York turning scary, and then Whitey not wanting to go to Harlem in the 70s, and then you got the cleanup of all of New York, and now Harlem is, I think, like vibrant and multicultural and expensive as hell, like the rest of Manhattan. But right, am I getting any of this right?
Oh, I got distracted by Peppa Pig because I was.
Well, Peppa Pig looks like a penis. I gotta say. But
Peppa's funny. Peppa's funny. And then there's Ben and Holly, that is also voiced by the same people, Peppa Pig.
Okay. I've never seen a Peppa Pig cartoon to see, what's up with Peppa, except just when you look at her, she looks like, the drawing.
Yep.
So,
did you ever watch any of the Solo Leveling or
I watched Secret Level, and it's pretty grim.
I told you, and the animation is phenomenal.
Well, yeah, the animation's crazy. It looks fully like if you showed it to somebody from, say the year 2002, they realize that they're not looking at actual people instead of animation.
Which episodes did you watch?
I watched. There was one based on Warhammer, and then I started the one based on Pac-Man.
Oh yeah, the Pac-Man is twisted. I never want to play Pac-Man again.
Yes, but I have an issue. It's by the same person who does Love, Death, and Robots.
Yep.
And that guy is a little bit just too reflexively and uncreatively dark for me. Like, I like Black Mirror. Mirror.
You actually watched the darkest of all the episodes. The 2 darkest episodes.
Okay.
The first episode actually on D&D is dark, but then it gets, it's D&D. It's a role-playing game. But the second episode is actually pretty happy. It's dark, but not too dark, but it's pretty.
Look at it. So I guess the conceit of the show is to take video games and put the action in a real context.
Yes, that's essentially it. There's the Exodus one, which I actually got teary-eyed over. That one actually is really good. And again, the 2 that you watched were the 2 of the darkest of all the episodes. The other ones are a little bit, like I said, the second episode is pretty lighthearted. You'll like that one. That's pretty funny.
So but that does underline an issue with a peeve I have about science fiction on TV and movies, where it's easy to look serious by going dystopian.
True.
And it's easy to do a dystopia. You just drive out the road between LA and Vegas has a bunch of like desert land, like ghost towns and just ruined cities. And you go to, there's a place called Zizek's Road where it has like a bunch of there's a spa that's went out of business 30 years ago. So you have these ruined buildings. So you just find a ghost town and then you say, well, this is America 10 years from now. It's the apocalypse. And you can make a shitty apocalypse movie for $500,000. Oh, you're muted again.
Yeah, while he's muted, I have a question for you because y'all were talking about uh, earlier sex and all along those lines. So, do we have this trial in France and everything that was a successful trial? Gazelle Pelicot won her case and all along those lines, and there were 51 people that were found guilty and all along
So
those lines.
yeah,
But
so
now some
what
people are
happened?
asking, what impact is that going to have in general? So, are we going to see more accusations from
Well,
women?
let's explain what the twisted crap that the main perpetrator did.
Yes.
He was in a supposedly loving relationship with his wife of 30, 40 years. And she'd fall asleep every night. Good night, dear. And turns out he was drugging her so the husband would, so she'd fall into um, a deep, deep sleep. And then he was inviting rando guys to bang her while she was unconscious. And this went on for years without her knowledge. And then I forget how the whole thing came out, but yeah, I think there were 70 men charged, and 51 of them were, including the husband, were found guilty of rape of an unconscious woman. And yeah, it's grotesque.
And I guess
Um,
the question is, are we going to see more people willing to come out? Because even in the United States, one of the things is people are afraid that they're going to be re-victimized by the court system and all along those lines. So is this going to make people a little bit more bolder to come out with their complaints, or is this just a one-off in France and everything? Or are we going to see
no,
more
I
people
think
doing
it could embolden women to go after their victimizers. Because I for another show I looked up the the rape stats by year,
Mhm.
and um, rape reported rapes declined somewhat from the 1990s, because 1991-92 was the peak for reported violent crimes in America, and the rates have dropped by 50% since then. Probably because you can't have street crime when nobody's on the street, when everybody's at home just doing internet. But then there was a bump in reported rapes right within 2 years after Me Too, where people in America said, "All right, it's time for me to stand up for myself and other women, and take some. Everybody knows that that the victim gets re-victimized when she or he reports being raped by the defense attorneys and the media." But there was a huge uptick in reported sexual assaults after Me Too.
Yep.
I mean, there will be a slight uptick, but I doubt it. That'll be in Europe because remember, we just had an election where we tried to be more inclusive, but the patriarchy shut that down because it became the white male is being abused in the U.S. and that's what Trump ran on, and it won. So yeah, we got.
So I found the chart. So in 92, reported rapes hit a local peak of 110,000 reported rapes in America, 1992, and it declines to 85,000 by 2012, and that's about when Me Too started. And so by 2018, reported rapes are up to 146,000. So the number of reported rapes jumped up by nearly 70% between 2012 and 2017, 18. And right, the last year reported 2023, 127,000. So.
Yeah. And well, another thing that was in the news a lot is student protests. They're in Europe. They're in a number of other places. I know that your daughter, Rick, is going to school, or maybe just graduated from school overseas in Europe, if I remember, England, if I remember correctly, and everything. So, what is your thoughts about this rise in student protests? It does seem like we're seeing a a lot of them, and some of them are from the far right, some are from the far left, and everything. But they said that even in Belgrade, there were tens of thousands of students protesting over the Novi Sad tragedy. So definitely things like the students are raising their voices again. So I just wanted your
Yeah,
thoughts as
that's fine. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado during the Vietnam War, and there were a ton of protests, and they were much crazier and more violent, and more disruptive than today's protests. And as I've said a million times, I mean, it was over the Vietnam War, and you could understand college students being upset and college age people being upset because the Vietnam War killed 50,000 Americans, more than I think any other war. I'd have to correct, well, since the Korean War up till now. And it wasn't even a successful effort on the part of the U.S. It was so, and the deal, Vietnam, there was the draft. Every year they'd pull bingo balls out of a hopper, basically with a birth date on it, like February 7th. And if they picked your ball out first or in the top 100, you'd get drafted. And unless you found a way to avoid the draft, you could get sent to Vietnam, where the average age of soldiers was 19. So you were cannon fodder. So students were understandably upset.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of things that make people upset, maybe even some of the people on the right upset, but apparently one of his last deeds that Joe Biden has done is he has commuted the sentence of 37 folks that were on death row to life without the possibility of parole. The three men that still face federal execution are Robert D. Bauer, who in 2018 gunned down 11 worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Dylan Ruth, the white supremacist who in 2015 opened fire on black parishioners at a church in Charleston, South Carolina, killing 9 people, and Dishaker Tesernani,
It's
31,
Sarnia or
one of
something. Right. So
the two
here's the
brothers
deal.
who carried out the bombing of the Boston Marathon in 2013. So they killed 3. And
Here's the deal. So I guess there were 40 people on federal death row.
Yes.
There are probably thousands of people in state prisons on state death row, but the federal one, Biden changed the sentences from death to life without parole for 37 out of 40. The 3 he didn't were Tsarnaev, the Boston bomber guy, Dylan Root, the guy who shot up the church, and the Tree of Life temple shooter who shot, I guess, 11 Jews at the Tree of Life. So but Republican, like right wingers are trying to, or on Twitter are saying, well, he thought about commuting these other guys, and everybody's like, shut up, idiot. He did not do it. So that's the controversy. The 3 worst on death row, he's leaving on death row. They will be eventually executed.
Yeah, those 3 will be. We're joined by Steve. Steve is one of our regular anchors, and he's over here joining us and getting that Christmas spirit. So, Steve, we talked about a couple of things, but what's on your mind and what have you been?
Well, yeah, sorry, I got a little late today. I left my Santa hat downstairs, but yeah, things are good. I think the main thing is I just wanted to come in today, give a little commentary, and then I'll try to be on tomorrow for the full hour. Apologize, got a little behind today, but I think it's been as we wrap up the year on World Edition and then also in World Politics tomorrow, I think that it's been a very interesting year. Obviously, I think if you look at over half of the world's population's elections occurring this year, I think that it was really a year against incumbents. So if you look at Great Britain, France, United States, even India, Modi not holding on to his majorities. And I think it's a rise of populism and almost a disruption of what many people feel as the elite who run these countries. And I think that if you look at the United States of America, that's really what happened. I think that people really felt that the economy wasn't doing better. They felt that the border issue was something that Kamala Harris did not address. And when you look at the Democrats kind of moving to the left, it gets harder to run a party from the center. And so I think what's done is done. And now the question becomes, what does this mean for foreign policy? I think it could mean perhaps stability in Ukraine if there's a deal made. We don't know what's going to happen in the Middle East, but with Syria and Assad going to Russia, that's definitely a disruption. It was a sort of an October surprise, call it December surprise in South Korea. So you're seeing a disruption in democracy. And so now the question becomes, before I hand back to you, Mark, is what does Trump do? Is he calling our bluff on these appointments? Is he using it as a litmus test for the 2026 primaries? Or is he really going to carry through with deporting millions of people, bringing in tanks, putting in RFK and Kash Patel, and basically saying, look, experience doesn't matter. Just let's go in and run this country. And so it's going to be a really interesting year, 2025, and I think the Democrats hopefully are recharging their batteries. I think they got to get back on message, and it's going to be. And then in North Carolina, the final thing, Josh Stein, very close now to being governor, 1 week away from being the 76th governor of the state of North Carolina, the 8th largest state. He'll be the 3rd Jewish governor in the U.S. Josh Green from Hawaii, which I learned from the governor-elect. I didn't know that. Josh Shapiro, and now Josh Stein, and they're all named Josh, which is kind of funny. But I think Stein is ready to go. His cabinet's in place, and he's got a lot of power taken away. But he's going to be going into the governorship with a Republican president in the middle of the worst hurricane in North Carolina history, Hurricane Helene. So it's going to be interesting to see what this governor does. But he's finally got his dream, and he's going to be 7 days away from being the chief executive of the 8th largest state, and first governor I've known very well as a friend, and I knew him before he was a senator. So I wish him and his family all the best as he leads North Carolina. But Mark, back to you.
Yeah, we've been joined by a gentleman from the UK, and Ferris Aronski and everything. He's got all kinds of stories and leadership as an entrepreneur. He's got his own consulting firm and has also worked as a school teacher working in different countries, and all along those lines I actually met him through one of the matchmaking services and everything like that. So Ferris, glad you were able to join us here for a few minutes and everything. So if you want to share a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned in your business life and some of the things that you've got going on. I mean, you've worked both as a journalist and even worked for the police as well. So share a little bit about what's going on in your world, particularly over there in the UK.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I was going to say this afternoon, but it's the afternoon here in the UK. It's the morning where you are. And it sounded like I joined during some fascinating conversations. And I'm sure a lot of my world will relate to the things you were talking about. As you said, Mark, I work in the field of leadership now and emotional intelligence. So we get teams sharper, people working better leaders. And it sounds like Steve was just telling us about new governor. And obviously, any governor needs some good leadership skills. But happy to share. I've got a lot of stories, Mark, as you alluded to, having lived around the world and come back again. I can happily talk on any topic.
Yeah, definitely. Tell us what some of the things that you find make for a good leader. You know, we just elected a president that had been a president before and is now coming back for his second term. Some people are thinking that he will be a good leader. Some people are wondering. And I know that there's a lot of conversation even around kind of what Steve was alluding to, the whole notion of these kind of peace treaties that are going on, whether that's in Israel or whether that's in Ukraine, because I think that he's even said that he's willing to sit down with, or Putin has said he's willing to sit down and talk to President-elect Trump. But I just wanted your take on this whole notion of what it takes to be a leader and what you expect from your world leaders and even leaders there in the UK.
Well, we've got ourselves a new leader as well here in the UK, and he has a different style to Trump and even to your current president. But look, when I work with leaders and I work with many of the big Fortune 500 companies. We have the pleasure of working with some global leaders. We always tell them you need to be able to do three things, right? You need to bring, if you want to be successful, you need to bring a combination of IQ, EQ, and FQ. Now, let me just unpack that a bit for you. IQ is have great ideas, great strategies, great direction. But if you do not have the other two components, you're going to just have a piece of paper, right? The second component is EQ, the emotional intelligence to take others with you on the journey. How do you connect with others? How do you communicate? How do you inspire and engage? And then the third component is FQ, which is focus quotient. A lot of people wouldn't have heard of, is the ability to be really focused on what you have deemed is important, on your idea. Without those three components, we see many leaders not be as successful as they hope. And so, it's very interesting if you look across, not just political leaders, but every leader has a spike across those three dimensions. It's how they fill in the gaps by who they surround themselves with, the approaches they take. That can, certainly in my experience, can be the crucial difference between success and failure.
That makes sense and everything. What have been some of the leadership qualities that you found even in working with the police as well? Because I know that you've done some work, I'm assuming that was with the police in the UK and everything, but what did it take to being a leader in that space and all along those lines? And what are some of the things that you had to get them to get out of their stereotype? Because sometimes they may think that they have leadership skills that they may not have.
Yeah. So, the UK police is a little different to the US police, but I think with the police, it's with many services, and I see this time and time again, where there's an inflection point. There are the police who are out on the streets, and then there are the police who are, back in the offices and lead. They tend to be the leaders, and the really skillful leaders are the ones who are able to bridge that divide. And it's the same sort of relationship you see. We have the pleasure of working with Amazon. I work with Amazon regularly, right? The guys in the central office versus the people in the depots. How can they relate to their world? And the best sort of police leaders I saw were the ones who straddled that, could communicate, and often would get out on the beat again, right? To show up, it's all about, leading from the front, walking the talk. Those were the guys who inspired us. They were able to flip between those two worlds effortlessly. And it's that flexing of their style, knowing the right things to say to the right community at the right time. That really, made them stand out during my time in the police here in the UK.
Yeah, just really quickly, because we got Nick Palveda, one of our founders of this network and everything, on the phone with us as well and everything. Okay. One of the things that he and Kim Calhoun, the other founder, talk about is the notion of education. Unfortunately, the U.S. has been falling behind in education literacy and all along those lines. I know he's been a big proponent of trying to make us do a better job, because in some categories we're down as far as 20th and everything. But you also worked as a school teacher, and I'm thinking there in the UK, but maybe in other countries as well.
Yeah.
So just share a little bit about how important education is to you, and how you think that we as a world are doing in terms of making sure that our folks understand the basics of education, whether that's physical literacy or whether that's just regular writing literacy as well.
Yeah, I mean, education is the bedrock of everything, isn't it? It's a cliche, but it's a true one. Yeah, I used to be a high school teacher, spent 6 years, taught in Latin America, taught in Southern Asia, taught in the Middle East, taught back here in the UK. So I've seen lots of different cultures and how they approach education. And I think great teachers, great educators should be wrapped up in cotton wool. But, all it takes... what is a great teacher? They are an inspirer. Let's go back to those leaders that we talked about. They are inspiring future generations. You cannot transfer all the knowledge from one person to another, but you can inspire someone to continue that thirst for learning. And, that's really what should be at the integral part of our education systems, that sort of sparking a passion and arming people with the tools to be curious, to get on with each other and ask the right questions. Yes, the technical information is very important. Certainly you mentioned financial literacy, certainly rudiments nowadays in computer skills and those sort of things. But if they're not surrounded by that curiosity and the ability to work with others, and that's where I see a real dearth globally in the people that we work with, that could be better sort of developed and educated.
Yeah, just really quickly, and then Nick and Rick may have some quick questions for you as well. But how was it contrasting what you learned in the terms of education in Latin America and in the Arab community as well, because you did say that you had experiences in
Yeah.
those areas as well. So what was the difference and what were the similarities?
Well, the differences, and I've taught in not just different countries, in different kind of school setups, some public schools, some private schools. And the difference is a cultural one, how much the families are involved in education and how much they outsource it and say, look, you kids just go to school. We're not really interested. You tell us. And you could see that, the kids where the families were invested, the families would turn up, they'd be brought into, hey, what work should the kid be doing each week? How are they performing? I want to hear all about it, but also how they turned up, were they fed, were they clothed, were they, so there were all these differences, not just based on the culture, but that sort of private public sector divide. And a lot of that gets lost in how well the student is going to be educated. And so certainly, there are a lot of similarities in the cultures that I taught in. They were very familial. So the family sort of dynamics and inclusivity and involvement in the education was put on a pedestal above other things at times. Now, obviously, it really depends on your personal circumstances as well, how much you can be dedicated on that. But that was very interesting from, say, when I came back to the UK and other Western societies that, there was at times less involvement. And so the kids sometimes felt like they were much more independent in one level, but lacking a bit of support in others.
Yeah, Rick?
You were talking about leadership, and I think I think Britain has the same problem that we have, is that you haven't had a charismatic prime minister since Tony Blair, who left in 2007, and we haven't had a president without, like Obama was kind of the last, charismatic. I mean, yeah, you can say Trump is charismatic, but half the population hates him. So do you think that countries suffer when you don't have a charismatic chief?
It's a really good question, Rick. And I've always been observed and sort of studied that there are three types of leaders, be they political or in companies. And you get the charismatic leader. I am the leader because I'm the most popular. You get the technocratic leader. I am the leader because I know the most about this information. And you get the hereditary leader. I am the leader because my dad was the leader. And what you find is communities and populations rotate between them. You always want what you haven't had. So if you've had a very popular leader, you actually go, and this is where we are in the UK, we go, actually, I want a guy or a lady who is very technical, very safe pair of hands. When you've had the safe pair of hands, you go, that's really boring. I want the popular guy now. I want someone who's charismatic. When you've had a hereditary leader for a long time, dynasties of the same family, right? You go, well, hang on a minute, we don't want this anymore. So human beings, it's part of the joy that makes us, but also, an Achilles heel. We always want the different thing. We always, the grass is always greener. So be careful what you wish for, because if you had a boring president, then the next person who comes in, might be good for a short time, but then
we're about to get a very exciting president.
you certainly are.
No doubt. What do you think is one of the biggest myths people have about business leadership, Ferris? Because a lot of times people think that they are successful or think that they have business acumen, and maybe they don't. I know that some people are even when you have the notion of having like a business plan. A lot of businesses don't have business plans, even though they probably need business plans and everything. But what are some of the big myths that you wish people would get out of in terms of business leadership and in terms of success in business?
I think the biggest thing I see, and I've worked with lots of leaders, is any of them who believe their own hype, think they're the finished article, right? Leadership is a skill you've got to learn. There is no one who is born a natural leader. Okay, you might be a bit further down the track, but you do not have all the skills that you need to be a leader. So don't let your ego blind you that you are the finished item. And that's what I see between the good and the great leaders, because you might be fortunate that you're in a company that's on its up, and a lot of that gets attributed to you. But real leadership is only seen when times are tough. Okay, the decisions you make, the people you hang out with, the voices you allow into the room. And that takes practice, that takes skill. So I've seen a lot of leaders who believe it a little too much in themselves and therefore do not continue to work on their skill set. And a lot of leaders who over rely on, when I talk about those three pillars, the IQ. I've got the best. I know what needs to be done. Well, that doesn't count for anything if you cannot convince others and lead them through that. So those are the sort of mistakes I commonly see in leaders, the good to the great leaders.
How important do you think delegation is in terms of leadership? Because I do think that sometimes leaders are not the best at delegating, and sometimes they're not the best at hearing the viewpoints of those that are under them, and all along those lines. So how important do you think delegation is, and also understanding the people that you are working with?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% right. But first of all, you just do not have the physical capacity to do all the work, right? Trust is a key component. There's a lot of famous studies showing that the more trust you put into a company, right, the more the profits will go up. And it's the same for a society. I think there was a famous Scandinavian study that showed for every 15% increase in trust levels, GDP would go up by 1%. So let's work on that. Let's build more trust. And that comes from delegation. Learning to delegate is a skill, stepping away. And, there's a great story of a U.S. naval captain, I can't remember his name, who was dropped into to a new submarine now, and he was given sort of effectively 1 month to turn the submarine around. It had the lowest ratings in naval history, and it had to pass inspection. Now, it typically takes a new captain 2 years to learn the crew, the systems of a new submarine, particularly if you've never worked on that class. Now, this guy in a month got the highest score ever because he did the simple thing of turning to his crew and saying, I don't know anything about this ship. All right, you do. You've been working on this for 5-10 years. I trust you implicitly. I will tell you where we need to go, but each of you will make the decisions for your area. Right? And that's how he now shares that story freely of how that's how you turn a boat around, right? It is that level of trust. Yes, you've got to make sure the people underneath you have the capability, but trust, delegation, capability, direction will get you to great places.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What made you decide that you wanted to start your own consulting firm and all along those lines? And we'll get ready to wrap up in a few minutes and everything. But What made you decide that you wanted to start your own consulting firm and get into this field? And what are some of the more interesting stories that you personally encountered in your own leadership?
Well, as you alluded to, Mark, I've had a varied career. High school teacher, worked at the police, worked as a journalist for a bit, then moved into the corporate world, oil and gas. Then strategy consulting. So I've done a lot of things, and I brought it all together. I realized I wasn't making an impact, even though I was a partner in a strategy consulting firm. Right, I wasn't really moving the dial for companies because of this lack of making sure your team was working well together. And because of my abilities as a school teacher, I transferred into the corporate world. That's the thing I was really good at. My old boss pointed out to me, he said, you're the only guy in this company who can just tame any lion out there, right? And get any teamwork. So I thought, well, that's the business I need to be running, right? I will go and help teams that even if they think they're working well, get them working even better, all right? Get them working sharper around their leadership and strategy. So it was really inspiring. And in many ways, it takes me back to when I was that math teacher. The kid who sat in front of me, age 10, said, I hate math, right? And I'd say to him, doesn't matter, buddy, I've got you, right? Because you got to learn math, and your life will be richer for it. But don't worry, you won't realize you're learning math when you're in my classroom. You'll just have fun. And so many of those kids today contact me going, thank you very much. And they're now senior in organizations. So that's the same impact that I want to make at a bigger level for corporates, for adults, for companies. So that's why I set up my company, and it's taken off, right? We work globally. So we do work in the US, we do work in Far East Asia, we work in the Middle East. And this is all in the space of 5 years.
Oh, well, along those same lines and everything, I went to school at Marquette, and our current coach, Shaka Smart, is a big believer in developing a winning culture and people kind of like working together all on one mission and everything. I'm also a fan of the Minnesota Vikings, and it seems that that's kind of the mentality that Justin Jeffries as well as Sam Dalton have been talking about. So how important do you think it is for a good leadership to develop kind of that winning mindset? I know that even I was watching or listening to one of Shaka's podcasts, and he was talking about this notion of a spiritual connection. He didn't mean it necessarily in the religious sense, but in the sense of everybody being connected together,
everyone being
all
connected,
along those lines. And I was just wondering your take on that and this whole notion of being a connected union and working as one, no matter whether you're in a nonprofit or a profit business.
100%, right? There's this concept of collective intelligence that works in teams, and they regularly show it in sports. They show it in the field of medicine. The top performing surgical teams are not the ones who have the smartest people. It's the ones who know each other best. They know their roles. They know each other. They trust. They know it can anticipate. And it's the same as sports teams. We have soccer here in the UK, the Premier League. There are some big teams that are failing because there's that lack of trust, and it's the smaller guys with the less known. I'm sure it's the same in American football, who can outperform because of that collective intelligence. So, and that's the spirituality that I refer. I think it's super important. I think the sooner a leader can instill that in a team or build it quicker, then amazing things happen.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense and everything. What's the one thing that you would want one of your clients to get from working with you that maybe they're not getting from working with somebody else, and all along those lines? And then if you want to share how people can reach you, and like I said, I hope that I get you back on some of these other shows as well, but I definitely want to get you into this show so we can get a little feel for what you're all about. Hopefully we'll have you come back.
We'll come back. We'll come back. Don't worry, Mark. I'd always say, look, I say to every leader, stay curious, right? Have one more conversation than you normally feel comfortable with, and listen more. Good stuff happens off the back of that. When you work with me or my team, you get very pragmatic sort of interventions. We're not coaches. We don't have the time or the luxury to wait for you to change. We change things around you and your team to get the best results. And so far, touch wood, we've always managed to achieve that. So that's what I tell leaders. Anyone who wants to have a conversation, I give away ideas freely. They can find me through my company name's on the screen. It's Shigeto Consulting. Shigeto is the Japanese word for a sharpening stone, because we sharpen leaders, we sharpen teams. Or they can come find me, Faris Ranki, on LinkedIn. I spend a fair amount of time there. I reply to every message, and we can carry on the conversation.
Sounds good. Well, glad you were able to join us here and everything along those lines during the World Edition. And we're going to get out of here. I know they've got Economics Monday and some of the other shows that are going on as well, but definitely enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully we'll have you back in the near future as well.
Thank you very much, Mark.
No problem.